6 months, when in fact the obfuscation of the currency is responsible not only for this final permanent destruction of jobs, but the decades of expatriation of industry which has led up to this time? I don't think so.
And people who are unemployed for such a long time, their skills erode, their attachment to the labor force diminishes.
Their purported attachment to the labor force diminishes, rather expires, when you expatriate or extinguish the industry by artificial multiplication of indebtedness in proportion to capacity to service debt. So Bernanke is the reason for these losses of jobs, not the savior of the unemployed.
And it may be a very, very long time before they find themselves back in a normal working position.
Only if Bernanke continues to deny them the only route to solution.
Ben Bernanke was appointed in 2006 by President Bush and reappointed by President Obama.
Surprise, surprise, surprise. There's change you can believe in.
He grew up here in Dillon, South Carolina, the son of a drugstore owner. He studied economics at Harvard and MIT and chaired the economics department at Princeton.
No, he did not study economics. That's only what they called it.
I hope some of these young people are working on a way to fix the economy.
If they were, then it's my experience it would be at least another 40 years before you decided to say a word about it. In fact, if you believe this is an economy, why would you ever report solution?
We met Chairman Bernanke Tuesday in the Thompson Library on the campus of Ohio State University. He was in Columbus on one of his frequent trips to hear how people are coping with the economy. Earlier in the day, he heard from the CEOs of Ford and IBM, but also from small business owners who told him they were having trouble getting financing from banks.
Here the interview is proving the conundrum. Obviously, the purported rescue plan was so that banks could loan money to people. And why is that? Because we need to sustain a vital circulation. But why can't we borrow? Because we've already exceeded our creditworthiness, that is, our capacity to service further debt as is necessary to assume to maintain a vital circulation, out of which we're paying interest and principal on an ever greater sum of debt. So, these people are the cause of our problem, not the solution.
The major banks are racking up profits in the billions. Wall Street bonuses are climbing back up to where they were. And yet lending to small businesses actually declined in the third quarter. Why is that?
Of course, I've just explained why. And we know, too, because the system itself is responsible for this terminal multiplication of indebtedness, which eventually and inevitably compromises our creditworthiness to borrow further as is necessary to maintain a vital circulation. We know, then, that Bernanke cannot give us the real explanation why. And why not? Because the real answer would expose the terminal faults of the system, its improprieties, its injustices, and a further fact, the mathematically perfected economy is indeed the only solution.
A lot of small businesses are not seeking credit because, because their business is not doing well, because the economy is slow.
And as I have just said, the reason the lie of economy or the means of terminal exploitation is slow is because it's in the final stages of an inevitable terminal finite lifespan, which can only end when this process of interest multiplies artificial indebtedness into a terminal sum of falsified debt to mere publishers of the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other.
Others are not qualifying for credit.
Just as I have explained for over 40 years, the system itself inherently and inevitably destroys creditworthiness in the final stages of its terminal lifespan.
Maybe because the value of their property has gone down?
Only because the inevitable failure of the system inherently destroys our ability to pay former prices.
But some also can't meet the terms and conditions that banks are setting.
Of course not. The system has already inherently and inevitably destroyed their ability to assume further debt.
Is this a case of banks that were eager to take risks that ruin the economy being now unwilling to take risk to support the recovery?
This is a preposterous question. The banks he's talking about, of course, are peripheral banks who are part of the lie. They borrow the money from the central bank. So they're at risk. And, of course, as the system multiplies artificial indebtedness into terminal indebtedness, that putting us, the purported debtor, into a condition where we cannot support any further debt, then this places these peripheral banks who interface with the people in the untenable situation that we're in. That is, when we can't afford to continue servicing our debts, they're required, nonetheless, to continue servicing their purported debt to the purported central banking system, which merely publishes the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other and multiplies a falsified debt to itself into terminal indebtedness, which causes all these problems. So it's not a question of peripheral banks maybe or maybe not assuming further risks. If they do assume the risks, you'll damn them for failing because they assumed bad risks. If they don't, then they're evil because they're not loaning to people who can't pay to service further debt. So it's a system. It's the obfuscation of the currency which causes these problems, and no legitimate authority in the world is going to blame one particular peripheral bank or another particular peripheral bank, given the fact that they're all put in the same situation. They're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. They go down with the people because they are obligated to service untenable terminal sums of falsified indebtedness to a purported central banking system.
We want them to take risks, but not excessive risks. We want to go for a happy medium.
People who are truly confirmed in the understanding which they wish to confer upon the people who should be deciding these matters they never speak in so ambiguously. What is this happy medium? There is no happy medium. The banks, the peripheral banks that is, are stuck between a rock and a hard place. They cannot loan more to a people who need to borrow more in order to maintain a vital circulation, because those people have already exceeded their creditworthiness, because the system itself, this obfuscation of the currency, which benefits the central banking system, has so multiplied artificial indebtedness upon them. So that's the reason for the problem. There is no happy medium. It's impossible. In fact, we have to borrow at an ever-escalating rate just to maintain a vital circulation, given any rate of interest. And this is another reason that rates of interest must come down. So this is a preposterous lie that there is some happy medium. And of course, Bernanke, in all his lying, is not about to tell you what that happy medium is or how you could possibly understand that such a thing exists as such a happy medium.
I think banks are back in the business of lending.
Catch that. They aren't lending, but they are back in the business of lending, although they never even left it. What's wrong with this picture? What's so preposterous about this ambiguous discussion, this ambiguous interview, which doesn't explain a damn thing, is nothing but a preposterous deception? What's wrong with it is the system itself has destroyed the ability of these banks to lend further. They're indebted to the central bank. They're failing because they can't pay it. They're failing because we can't pay them. Because this system, this obfuscation of the currency, has multiplied artificial indebtedness beyond us to a purported central banking system which produces nothing and provides us no service whatsoever but multiplication of artificial indebtedness into terminal artificial indebtedness.
But they have not yet come back to the level of confidence or overconfidence that they had prior to the crisis.
Any confidence in an inherently and inevitably terminal system, Bernanke, is overconfidence.
We want to have an appropriate balance.
If that were true, then he would want to terminate the Federal Reserve System and immediately adopt mathematically perfected economy, because that is the only thing. Mathematically perfected economy is the only process which perpetually maintains the only balance, which is a balance.
Bernanke's first interview ever came in 2009, shortly after the panic.
Wow.
It was then that he gave us a rare opportunity to see the Federal Reserve headquarters in Washington. Last month, Bernanke announced the Fed's intent to buy $600 billion in U.S. Treasury securities, which is supposed to have the effect of lowering rates on long-term loans for things like cars and homes.
So here again we have this perpetual, preposterous lie that buying government securities is what holds down interest rates, when the Fed itself is the regulator of the interest rates. No, instead, all it's doing is propping up a bankrupt government forever and forever and forever to pour money into circulation through the vehicle of federal overspending, to pretend that this lie of economy is sustainable, when even this process of artificial sustention, that is, artificially extending this finite lifespan of an inherently terminal system, these means of artificial sustention themselves are limited.
Bernanke wanted to emphasize that these are the Fed's own reserves. It's not tax money.
Sure, their principle, which is instead of being retired from circulation as it rightly would be, is laundered into the ever unauthorizable possession of a central banking system through a falsified debt to the bank, which gave up no lawful consideration whatsoever for that principle. And these reserves are interest, which has multiplied debt into further principal laundered into these banking systems and further collection of interest on all that principal until we inevitably fail or succumb to a terminal sum of artificial indebtedness under this process. But the further lie here is that these are not part of the taxation system yet, because the Federal Reserve System is buying treasuries and the people are going to have to pay those debts back to the Federal Reserve System with interest on it. So they're not only taxation, they comprise a multiplication of taxation, which contributes to this inevitable failure on the part of irreversible accumulations of federal falsified indebtedness.
And it doesn't add to the federal deficit.
How is it this lying bastard can tell us that?
What did you see that caused you to pull the trigger on the $600 billion at this point?
It has to do with two aspects. The first is unemployment. The other concern I should mention is that inflation is very, very low, which you think is a good thing and normally is a good thing, but we're getting awfully close to the range where prices would actually start falling.
Well, if you haven't noticed, for years now, prices of major items such as homes have fallen. Well, prices of more affordable things such as eggs, milk, etc. are rising. And of course, still here, nonetheless, the cause of ever-increasing prices is artificial multiplication of indebtedness in proportion to capacity to pay, which forces industry to ever upwardly escalate its prices in order to maintain necessary margins of solubility, which are necessary to its survival. So the problem here is of increasing prices still exists. The problem is, if we can't afford them, is that this is a signal of the final terminal stages. That is, that all these efforts at artificial sustention are failing, that industry is not able to maintain its prices, that prices are falling, and This is a consequence of dramatically deflating circulation in the end of this thing when the money that we've been pouring